Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. I'm super excited to have Rebecca Lyons joining us today. Rebecca is the founder and CEO of HerSay, an AI-powered doctor visit companion that helps women advocate for their health with clarity and confidence. After her own journey with medical gaslighting and a delayed diagnosis of stage 4 endometriosis, Rebecca turned pain into purpose, building a tool that empowers women before, during, and after every appointment. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley.
It's my pleasure. When we first met, I don't know, probably a month or so prior to this recording, just during our conversation and hearing your story, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to have you on the podcast. So I know that this is going to be a really insightful and empowering conversation for all of our listeners.
Absolutely. And I was thrilled to be invited to attend as well.
I love it. And of course, I did share with our listeners an overview of who you are and what HerSay is. But that's where I'd love to start today is have you share more about yourself, what HerSay is, and also what happened that may have led you to wanting to build this AI-powered doctor visit companion.
Absolutely. So we can dive in sort of through my experience. I first had symptoms of endometriosis without knowing it about 8 years ago. My doctor at the time sort of looked into some of those symptoms. I had, extreme fatigue, IBS symptoms, among other things. We did sort of blood panel, we did a sleep study, and when everything came back as normal, it was kind of like, well, you're young, you're probably healthy. So I don't know, this might just be how things are for you. So quite unfortunate and dismissive. And you sort of take that as, okay, well, I guess it's in my head, and you move on with your life. I did work with a naturopathic doctor at that time who helped a little bit with alleviating some of those symptoms. And when I had a flare up more recently, I had since sort of transitioned primary care providers. My previous doctor retired, so I had a different care provider. And when I sort of went to her with these symptoms and asked the question of, do you think this might be endometriosis? I've got some friends and family members who have this. Instead of being sort of brushed off, it was, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's lean into that. And what we can do is some diagnostics. Typically doesn't show up on an ultrasound, so we'll do that and see what happens. And unfortunately, and fortunately, it did show up because of this stage. I have deep infiltrating endometriosis with, large chocolate cysts. So the type of endo that I have did in fact show up on that ultrasound. So we were able to definitively diagnose it at that point. These days, you can diagnose endometriosis with symptoms alone. So if somebody comes in with, this list of symptoms, they can very well say that, yes, it's likely that, rather than having to go down the route of laparoscopic surgery, which is the current gold standard. So that experience that I had with my diagnosis here with my nurse practitioner was such a very empowering experience, in that she not only didn't dismiss me, but gave me my options for, here's what else we can do. I can refer you to a specialist. We can look at your different treatment options. Maybe that looks like some type of hormonal therapy. Maybe that looks like some type of, laparoscopic surgery. There's sort of this big sort of broad thing. We don't know exactly what causes it. So it was just very helpful to be explained. Here's everything that she understands current state. Here are all of my options that I can choose from. What would I like to do? I could simply do nothing. That's an option too. And having never had that experience of that full understanding of what's going on, here's all of your options for treatment. You're allowed to decide and change your mind if something's not working, was something that I wanted to ensure other women could experience when it came to their health. And that's where HerSay was born.
I think it's incredible because, like you shared, most women honestly get to this point where they don't feel heard or supported or whatever it might be as they go through these challenging diagnoses and difficult appointments. And so being able to take your personal experience and realizing like there has to be a better way to do this. There has to be a better experience that women can have, I think is incredible. And you've used that to then create HerSay.
Exactly. Yes. So my hypothesis was that women who were navigating the medical system were likely less heard, probably experiencing more medical gaslighting. When you look at the literature, these are the things that come up. So I did some sort of online market research, found very strong positive correlation with the sentiment, and then reached out to my network to get conversations going. And we spoke with over 100 women over the span of 2.5 weeks. Very overwhelmingly positive response. And yes, we want to talk about this. We need a solution. What's going on isn't working for us. And we use that user feedback to truly inform how we built the product.
Absolutely. And I want to dive into what you mentioned there about that user feedback, because when you first told that to me, I was like, that's amazing that you had so many conversations in such a short amount of time and also had such good outcomes from those conversations. And so I'd love to hear more about your process if you're okay with sharing it to what you did to set up these user feedback sessions. Because I think for any founder who's building anything, being able to speak with your ideal user or client or customer is huge for being able to drive what you then use to create the product or put together the service that you're going to be offering.
Absolutely. So we used a series of meta ads and we published our problem statements or hypothesized problem statements on Meta because you can get fairly targeted in your audience that you're trying to reach. And it's pretty cost effective. That was the route that we went, scrappy startup way. So when I put those statements out there, they were like, I'm tired of being gaslit by my doctor, or my doctor doesn't hear me when I explain my pain or my symptoms, right? So pretty pointed in what we were trying to accomplish in alleviating those problems. And where we look for a 2% click-through ratio is in those target users are actually clicking on that ad. We were actually getting between 8 to 12% click-through ratio. So exponentially higher than what would traditionally be that 2%, meaning a positive correlation. Mm-hmm. From there, I had mentioned the user interviews. So because we had kind of, okay, there's something here, when we went out to the network, we designed a survey, both digital and sort of an interview style survey. And when we chatted with all of these users, not only did we, ask the consistent question, we were able to, with those in-person interviews, gather a lot more data feedback. You can sort of press into, okay, well, tell me more about this. And it was a lot of that verbal feedback that we used to inform the product features, right? And so from there, we're building not just a product for women, but we're building a product for women by women, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the secret sauce, is getting that early user feedback before the product's even a thing, right?
Yeah, totally. And as someone who works in social media, I love that you turn to meta ads to be able to test this, and how smart to think of like, okay, what are these really focused problem points that we want to run these ads for and see if they resonate with someone and encourage them to reach out. And I think it's so great that you combined the digital survey aspect with also like the face-to-face interviews, like you said, be able to have those deeper conversations and get more insights than what a survey itself might give you.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And when being able to do these sessions and whatnot, did you run into anyone who's like a little bit hesitant if they were like, well, this is brand new, like what am I getting into? Or I'm curious to hear if you faced any type of pushback and how you navigated around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a sales and marketing background, and pushback is no stranger to me in my career. So navigating some of those challenges that people are bringing up is something that I'm quite used to. And at this point, when we're in the user feedback stage, we're not looking to convince anybody that this is the solution for them, or this is, we're looking to understand if there are challenges, what can we do to maybe mitigate the feeling there? Or maybe we need to look at a different target audience if we're seeing a correlation in that aspect, or pivot the product, right? Mm-hmm. So a handful had data privacy concerns, which absolutely everybody should be very curious about what happens to your data when you're signed up with any product that you're sharing information with. Luckily, because we're sort of peripherally in that medical space, we can look to be HIPAA compliant. There's PIPEDA, like sort of the security of people's information. We would always want to make sure that we're compliant with. So that looks like anonymizing user data if it's stored and or not storing that in our central database at all. Perhaps that's looking like local user storage and other things like that. So there's ways to work with those security concerns in a way that's mutually beneficial. We're still able to provide a service that ideally is life-changing for women and allowing them to receive the diagnosis and care they deserve, while also making sure that we balance those concerns. Other things that came up were sort of I already have so many apps. I don't want to download another app, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by trying to wrap in the features and functionality of more than one type of product, such as maybe something for menstrual tracking and fertility. Well, can we encompass all of that into one solution, or do maybe an integration with those types of products so that you're, not needing to translate information between the two? Maybe that looks like a connection with wearable devices, right? The Apple Health and Fitbit and things like that, which is something we're exploring for the longer term. So we can really get an all-in-one view. But those are probably the two primary concerns, and simply look at what those are, validate whether there's something that we can work with, work around, or work into our product, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from there, use it as part of sort of that when we go to market, right? Use that as part of the language that we put on our website to make sure we're addressing those concerns up front.
Totally. And once you had all these wonderful conversations and got some guidance and feedback that directed you where to go, now let's talk about actually building out the product and what that process was like.
Absolutely. It was so much fun. I love technology. I always have. I had like, as a 16-year-old, I worked at Best Buy and sold computers, and it was really my thing. Always has been. So when it came down to actually using that to inform the product development, I went with a no-code tool. I tried actually pretty much all of them to see what I got, and ended up with Lovable, actually, which is a very user-friendly no-code tool. We use that for prototyping because it puts together really, really beautiful user interface that is easy to click through. There's some features and functionality that you can pull together that really help for MVP purpose, so such as connecting with the database and things like that. From there, we used that prototype and took it to a developer to make sure that it was scalable, right? The product we're developing, we can actually use, and it's not going to crash, and we're not going to have any security concerns and all of that fun stuff. So worked with this full stack developer who's been an absolutely wonderful resource to develop that minimum viable product. And now we're kind of in that beta testing stage with that, I'll say it's just an early launch, right?
Mhm.
Meant to gather some additional user feedback before we fully go to market with a polished product. So yes, we're looking to recruit people to test this out and give us feedback on a continuing basis.
Incredible. And I love that you mentioned that you use this no code tool, Lovable, because I have had so many conversations with people lately about how I know you mentioned you're really into technology, but there's so many low barriers to entry for founders these days to use tools that don't require code or don't require things that they might not have the knowledge for. And so using something like Lovable to help you build out that prototype, I think is an amazing way to start and just help you kind of get your feet wet and think about what it might want to look like and how you might want to position it.
Yeah, exactly. The technology is so accessible to us now, whereas, 10 years ago, this wasn't the case. It's a
Mhm.
really fun and interesting time to be a founder.
I agree. And then also being able to take that prototype and bring it to that full stack developer to say, okay, here's what I've built. Now you take it and tweak it into how it needs to be to become that MVP. And as you shared, you're currently in the beta stage. So let's chat about that, what it's been like to, as you say, have a soft launch and be able to get these users and kind of use HerSay and see what their feedback might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So the soft launch was really key. We were going to do a full-on public beta, but got a little bit of a cold feet situation last minute. So we pulled it back and put out messaging. We're just simply onboarding people in cohorts for more than one reason. I really want to make sure that we're capturing that user feedback effectively. And if we have hundreds and hundreds of people on there submitting feedback at the same time, it's not as easy to make sure that we're taking action on what needs to change.
Mhm.
At the same time, onboarding in cohorts allows us to scale the technology at the same time. So that might look like in the AI side where we're getting all of these queries, like how many does that look like? How can we get a benchmark going for what we can expect per user? Helps with our costing model, helps with understanding the strain on any of the technology we've set up. If there's any challenges, things might slow down. How do you improve that experience? So we decided to do the cohort onboarding so that we have an easier experience for everybody who's involved, including my team. And yes, from there, looking to get that direct user experience, looking where are people going in? What are they clicking on first? What's resonating with them? Where are they going most often, right? There's all of this user experience that I think sometimes as founders, we don't appreciate because we're so connected to the product that we've built. And it's so exciting to share that. Sometimes when we give that to somebody who has zero exposure and zero experience, our expectation is very different from the reality of how the market reacts to that product, right? Not in a bad way, but simply just that's how life is. So it's been really fun to see, like, take yourself sort of out of it a little bit and observe how are people responding and what are the features that they're using most. Maybe that's different than what our hypothesis was. So yeah, from there, ideally getting that user feedback, and then we can make sure when we go to market with this full polished product, it is actually what is going to be most useful to our users, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I think that's such a great idea to start with those small cohorts and be able to kind of take that feedback in bits and pieces. And I'm curious too, how you know which feedback is actually stuff that you do want to implement. So I imagine that you get like a lot of great ideas and suggestions, but I also imagine too that there might be some ideas or requests that don't totally make sense for the product right now.
Yep.
So I'm assuming, of course, the ones that get requested the most might be a little nudge to add onto the app. But how do you kind of work through knowing which feedback isn't exactly quite the right fit and which is, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So when we're filtering through all of that user feedback to determine exactly what makes the cut or what we implement first, there's sometimes a bit of a squeaky wheel phenomenon that we see. And it's like the same user requesting the same stuff over and over, but that request for that particular person may not resonate with the larger group. So we want to make sure that if we're going to make any changes or implement any features, it makes sense for the majority of people, because as much as we would love to have a tailored experience for every person who needs something, it makes more sense to build for a larger audience, right? So some of that might look like putting out surveys with those user feature requests and having people rank the ones that we think maybe will have the most impact. Other things might look like, does this align with our mission and vision? Yes or no, right? That can be really big deal because some people might ask for things that maybe don't resonate with the why as to why you're building this product in the first place. So and as a founder, you're also allowed to make the decision because you're the one who's responsible for driving the company, right? What else can I say about user feedback? There's so much that you might get that if you only get, a handful of suggestions in one realm, but then majority are asking for this, you can also look to prioritize that based on the volume as well, right?
Totally.
But yeah, I don't have all the answers, it's just sort of how I've learned to do this through many of the wonderful accelerator programs we've participated in, but it's an exciting thing. And I feel sometimes the founders that I speak with get a little discouraged when, they're getting this feedback about the product because maybe it starts to turn away from what the original intent was. But I think if we're open-minded and we lean into what the market is asking for, we'll probably be a little bit more successful rather than trying to push something uphill, right?
Yes. And I think you just nailed that on the head, where it's not necessarily about what we want or what we think people need. Like, we need to focus on what people themselves are telling us what they need and then be able to build it from there. So, like you shared, it might turn away from what a founder is building from the start, but the whole goal is to be able to meet people where they are and provide the solution to the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah, and now I'd love to chat about what it's like building in health tech specifically. I mean, you mentioned earlier that there is HIPAA, and what was the other one you mentioned? Like,
But yeah,
yeah, that one too. And I think being able to focus on like compliance and so many other like data security things, I think it's a unique beast compared to other sectors or um, other parts of tech. And so, what has that part been like, kind of navigating? I don't want to say those roadblocks, but just those unique challenges that other sectors of tech might not have to experience themselves.
absolutely. So med tech, health tech, digital health is a little bit of a unique industry because of the regulatory information that you need to make sure you're compliant with for very good reason. There are different criteria for different regions in the world. So, the US, Canada, the United Kingdom, globally, right? There's different, sometimes country specific regulations, sometimes region specific regulations that you need to be compliant with. So, I am very, very fortunate to have sort of along this journey met a good friend, Megan Kane, who has recently started Relia Health. She's an absolute wonderful resource when it comes to navigating the regulatory landscape, and has done a wonderful job helping with our guidance. Because what we're building specifically isn't sort of a medical device, it's not a physical product, and we're not looking to integrate at this time with medical charts and other very sensitive pieces of data like that. Luckily, we don't fall under some of the scrutiny of FDA regulation and things that
Mm.
take many, many years to achieve, right? Um, with that being said, there may be some opportunity where we'll need to navigate that if we want to get ever into actual like diagnostic work as that sort of develops. If we want to get into storing those medical records, right, we do need to have that information on the horizon so that we're doing that not only ethically but also in compliance with all regulations. So I can't speak to the medical device, right, in med tech. I know that it's a very long and drawn out process, quite expensive to get those approvals and whatnot. But it's very different from just being a software startup, dealing with other, sales and marketing technology, for example, right?
Mhm.
Definitely don't have the same barriers, but you can overcome them. It is achievable. You just need to find the right resources to help you navigate.
Yes. And I'm glad that you brought up the part about resources and having the right connections because, one, you've introduced me to a million wonderful people at this point, and it goes to show like how important it is to have those resources or people you can turn to when you're facing something in your startup or whatever it might be that's a little bit outside of your knowledge scope. And so I love that you mentioned Megan because she's one of the great people that you had introduced to me. But again, it's just a great reminder that you share here is that you don't need to know everything. And it's totally okay if you don't know everything because that's what you can lean on other people and other resources for.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think building your network as a founder can really help you move forward a lot faster and with a lot less resistance, and also feel less lonely because it is kind of one of those journeys where you end up doing so much solo or with your co-founder or co-founding group.
Totally. And let's dive into that further because that's one thing, one of the many things that you're really good at, which is networking and connecting people and really building your personal brand. And I think, especially now in 2025, that's something that every founder needs to prioritize is being able to build their personal brand and make solid connections offline and online. And so, through your own experience and journey of doing that, I'd love if you could share some tips that other founders can perhaps implement as they do this themselves.
Absolutely. I do love networking. And I think sometimes people can feel really icky about that word networking, like, oh, what is that? I just think of it as meeting people, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't need to be this awkward, weird thing. It doesn't need to be transactional. I'm just naturally a very curious person. And if you're curious about other people, what they're working on, what they're doing, and how you can help them, it sort of comes back to you tenfold. So
Mhm.
anytime I meet someone, I don't even talk about what I'm building. I don't even talk about my company until it makes sense to do so, if at all. But I'm really curious about, what is it that you're working on now? Is that a path that you're really enjoying, or do you want to make a pivot, right? Tell me more about what you enjoy most. Oh, cool. How can I help you get to that next step, either in your career or with your product? Or, what are you building, and who can I connect you with that will help move you forward? I don't expect anything in return from people. I think, when you have a really good conversation, people remember you. They know what you're up to. You have that conversation, and it will come about naturally. It happens to me all the time, always on LinkedIn or by email. I'm getting these introductions, and it really does help to move whether my company or my personal brand forward, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think I had mentioned to you, I'm looking for more opportunities to sort of get myself out there, looking for more speaking opportunities and things. And you're like, well, I've got this podcast, so why not, join me there? So your ask doesn't need to be, if you are asking for anything, it doesn't need to be this super complex pointed thing. It's how do you want to move to your next step? And maybe that looks like getting yourself out there. Maybe that looks like attending more events. You could simply ask, do you know of any events that would make sense for me to attend so that I can talk to more people in this space, right?
Mhm.
Um, you can sort of treat it as less of a transaction and more of that relationship building tool, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is a really good point, is to focus on what you can give rather than what you could get. Because like you shared, I mean, that will come around back to you tenfold just naturally, but being able to be support people and say, well, what is it that you need, and what do I have in my toolbox that I can share with you to help make that happen? And it just goes to show the incredible person that you are for being able to bring all these different people together and make those connections for people, as they continue to grow their startup or whatever it might be that they're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. It fulfills me to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's no sweat.
Yes, totally. And one thing I'm curious about, because someone had actually asked me this once, and I'm like, that is a great question. I don't do it, but maybe other people do. I'm curious if you have like your own type of like spreadsheet or CRM that just kind of tracks everyone that you have in your network, especially as it continues to grow, so that if someone's looking for something specific, you can just turn to this list. That's something I'm coming to realize as I meet with more people and build my connections. I'm like, oh shoot, I should start to really keep track of this so I can be more intentional with introductions and connections I may be able to make.
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a sales enablement background. I've implemented CRM and marketing systems. So yes, a little bit of a nerd when it comes to that type of technology. I really like Play as a tool. It integrates really well with the calendar. It has AI integrated, which, looks at people's like LinkedIn platforms and the different interactions you've had to sort of pull some smart insights. So if you need, hey, like, what's this person all about before you jump on that call? It's very helpful as a tool, I find. And if you keep all your notes kind of logged, even just a quick sentence about like, hey, I met with Ashley and we went on this podcast discussion together about startup, like just having a little bit of information can be very helpful for staying on top of things and keeping organized. I would highly recommend, especially if you do have someone who hasn't asked for you, as in, I'm building a startup in the field of health tech or med tech, and I'm looking for connections in XYZ regulatory, right? If you
Mhm.
make that note, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to recall. Just the act of taking the note in the first place helps your memory, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Being able to implement from the start some type of CRM or system can really, one, save you a lot of time in the long run, so you don't have to go back and do it all, but really helps to keep things organized as you continue to grow and start to get involved in even more things.
Yes, exactly.
And one thing I always love chatting about with founders is hearing what they've been focusing on in terms of funding. And so I'm curious to hear if you're comfortable sharing, if you've
Yeah.
been bootstrapping, if you've already raised, if you're going to be raising. Like, let's chat about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are still relatively early, sort of building that market traction. So I feel we're not quite being in the industry that we're in. We don't have a physical medical product where, you need to worry about manufacturing and supply chain. So I think we're too early for fundraising.
Mhm.
We're sort of that pre-seed stage. I would like to bootstrap as long as we can, because I think if you start to put together that market traction, that speaks volumes, and it's going to help you to align with investors that are on board with what your mission is and what your vision is. So our intent is not to not look at fundraising, but to sort of evaluate when it makes sense to do so. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like at this stage. So we've been fortunate because of how sort of scrappily we've been able to build, not to have a whole lot of expense, right?
Mhm.
And that's not the luxury that every founder has. Sometimes you do need to go in and raise early, and that's totally fine. But I think if you're in that early stage, especially if you're a founder who hasn't founded a company in the past, aligning with resources, as in funding resources that also have really great connections that will help you wrap your head around this entrepreneurial journey and really support you through that, I think is really important, because no one knows everything. And
Mhm.
I had talked about being really curious. The more you learn, the better it's going to shape you. So though again, I'm not necessarily fundraising at the current time, I would certainly, if we were to align with another impact oriented group who's really willing to see this vision of moving women's health initiatives forward, right?
Mhm.
That would be important to us. So I urge you to look at your own values and align the same way.
100%. And you brought up a really good reminder and point there that you might not be doing it now, but that doesn't necessarily mean it won't be happening in the future, and vice versa. I mean, someone could decide that maybe they like don't want to go with raising at all or anything like that.
Yeah,
And so you shared
exactly.
a really good point there of just being able to like evaluate what's going to make the most sense for your vision and what you're looking to achieve.
Absolutely. Yes. And funding kind of comes with its own blueprint a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the rule book has changed a little bit as a founder, where to your point, you don't necessarily have to fundraise. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
prior, 10 years ago, that would have just been what you did because that's what you did. So you certainly have options. And I don't think that founders need to feel pressured one way or another. There's many ways to finance your venture. And the best way is, I think, through being as lean as possible, and having that user funded, or your customer funded as early as possible.
Totally. As you've gone through this journey, I'm curious to hear what's one thing you've learned like now that you wish you knew back then when you first started.
Absolutely. So definitely finding product market fit and spending a lot of time on honing in on that before building. I think, I had a previous venture in HR tech where I came up with this wonderful idea related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, with sort of the shift in the economy, the geopolitical market. Sort of the market for that type of tool really dried up. And that's already a bit of an uphill battle to fight, right? We're having challenges there, and then when that becomes tenfold, I wish I would have paid more attention to what was going on in the market, understood exactly what my ideal customer was looking for, and then took that build slower and built purposefully for the user feedback, which is, I think, what we've done successfully with HerSay. So keeping that pulse on the market and making sure that you fully understand what those users need and what the pain point is that you're solving for is going to really help you be more successful. Because if you're not solving a problem that people will pay for, you're going to have a really hard time making money, right?
As simple as that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that is really key to, like you said, focus on product market fit. Make sure, and I go back to what we were chatting about earlier, but make sure that you're actually building something that people are actually looking for, not what you think they're looking for.
Exactly.
And one thing I would love to hear, and as I shared before we started recording, this might be a tough question for you since you know so many amazing people. But I always love to have our guests give a shout out to someone who's doing something really cool in tech right now, whether it's another founder or VC or any type of ecosystem builder. I'm curious to hear who you would give a shout out to.
Absolutely. Well, I already shouted out Megan, so I'm going to do a second here. Argentina Beltran is building inclusive AI, Inclusify, and her whole MO is connecting founders with funders that are really in relation to sort of those that are typically underfunded and underserved. So I think it's a really wonderful cause that she's building for. She's a wonderful resource herself that comes from sort of that venture background. And I think her company is moving like forward in strides for all the right reasons. So I would highly recommend checking out INCLUSIFAI.
Amazing. Rebecca, this has been such a fun episode, and I've so enjoyed having you come on the show. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online if they'd like to connect.
Yes, absolutely. Would love to connect. Most active on LinkedIn. So you can find me there.
Amazing. And I will include your LinkedIn in the show notes. That way people can easily find you from there. But thank you so much again for coming on this week's show.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I appreciate it.